And joining me a short time ago, the Federal Finance Minister, Mathias Cormann. Minister Cormann, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Well, some robust numbers on growth today. How are we going against the MYEFO from December?
Well, obviously the national accounts released today show some positive signs, and obviously economic growth slightly stronger than expectations, which is a good thing, but the growth challenge remains. Economic growth in Australia is still below trend. We need to get past that 3% in order to start having an impact on employment moving forward.
I'm just looking, though, at the nominal growth numbers, which is, of course, an indication of the revenues that the government is getting. That's, for that December quarter, it was 1.6%, and I think MYEFO for the full year forecast, Joe Hockey brought it down to 3.5%. Now, that would indicate that you're doing quite well in terms of revenues. Is that going to impact how hard you have to cut and how disciplined you have to be in this budget?
Our plan is to build a stronger economy and create more jobs. Now, a stronger economy and more jobs means that you've got a positive impact on the revenue side for government as well as on the expenditure side. But beyond that, we still will have to make a significant effort in order to repair the budget that we've inherited from our predecessor.
All right. Well, now, how is the Chinese growth figure playing into this? The People's Congress said today 7.5%. Some people would say that was growth at all costs. How do you see that, particularly in terms of those stockpiles at the steel mills? I mean, is it a good thing for Australia?
Well, I mean, commodity prices are somewhat lower than what was expected at MYEFO. So in terms of an impact on revenue, I mean, we've got to just see, based on advice on how that is ultimately going to play out. I mean, global economic conditions are certainly improving slightly, and given that we are a trading nation, given the importance of export income to the performance of our economy, that is certainly a good thing.
The Business Council of Australia published its submission on the budget, and it was very strongly calling for a look at middle-class welfare, at health, welfare, the PBS, calling for the government to really take a long, hard look in these areas.
And right now we're getting submissions, advice and suggestions from right across the community, from business, from social stakeholders, and I mean all of that goes into a broader process, and of course the detail in terms of the government's response to all of that will be part of the budget.
There was a leak in the Financial Review recently about another form, arguably, of middle-class welfare, which of course is the paid parental leave, and the suggestions that the Commission of Audit was recommending strongly against it. You've now got Senator John Williams musing perhaps about crossing the floor on this issue. Isn't it time that perhaps you took a much harsher look at that particular policy?
Well, I don't accept that a fair income paid parental leave scheme is middle-class welfare. Introducing and establishing a fair income paid parental leave scheme is an important economic and social reform for Australia. It is obviously going to help us with the productivity improvements that we think our economy needs. It will help lift participation. It will have a positive impact on population growth.
Even women's groups think there are better ways than you can do this, and certainly for women earning $140,000, $150,000 a year, surely that is vintage middle-class welfare, isn't it?
Well, I mean, this is something that was extensively litigated in the lead-up to the last election for a very long period of time. It is a policy that we took to the last election. It is something that we're committed to, and the reason we're committed to it is because we believe that this will help us build a stronger, more prosperous economy, and it will help us create more jobs.
Let me ask you about another controversial idea that the government is putting forward now, and that's the watering down of the Future of Financial Advice, the FOFA reforms, and in particular this best interest test. Now, there are increasing calls, Minister, that really the watering down is not the right way to go, and this is largely the result of lobbying, probably from financial planners. Is this something that you are absolutely committed to now?
Well, again, we took a balanced policy to the last election. The Labor Party pursued a lot of vested interests in this. I mean, there are some serious vested interests in this related to the union movement, which have been running a very effective campaign.
Aren't the vested interests really on the other side? I mean, you think this all came out of an inquiry as a result of Storm Financial, didn't it?
Well, and I'll just give you one example. There was an inquiry into Storm Financial chaired by Bernie Ripoll, a Labour Member of Parliament, highly regarded, which never recommended the introduction of the so-called opt-in proposal, which forces clients to re-sign contracts with their financial advisors on a regular basis. Out of more than 400 submissions, there was one submission that called for the introduction of opt-in, and it was the submission from the industry super funds movement. And of course, the Labour government at the time adopted it.
Are you sure that Arthur Sinodinos won't be changing his position? Because there is a build against this position now, quite a strong one.
Well, what I'm sure is that the government will deliver on its election commitments, and Senator Arthur Sinodinos is doing an outstanding job in that regard, implementing the policies that we took to the last election. Obviously, always, when you work your way through the finer details in government, you make sure that you take on board any sensible suggestions for improvements. I mean, that is just common practice.
All right. Lastly, can I ask you about Qantas? Alan Joyce today has climbed down on his position on the carbon tax. He's had to eat humble pie about any kind of debt guarantee. I'm wondering, given his relationships with the unions are probably at an all-time low, isn't this a chief executive that is truly tarnished? Wouldn't the government want him to stand down now?
Well, that's just got nothing to do with the government whatsoever. I mean, the position of the CEO of Qantas is a matter for the board of Qantas, and I wouldn't want to express a view one way or the other. What is appropriate is to ensure that Qantas, as a business in a highly competitive market, is able to compete on a level playing field, which is why we are putting forward the proposition that Part 3 of the Qantas Sale Act should be removed, because it's imposing restrictions on Qantas which are not imposed on their competitors, which make it harder for them to compete.
Mathias Cormann, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to talk to you.